Alright, everyone, welcome, and I hope you're excited because now it is time for us to start creating in Blender. So, this is the reference image that I'll be chasing for what I want my crate to look like. For the most part, I'm pretty happy with the design choices that are made here, and some personal things I might want to change are, for one, these vents that are on the top, I kind of don't like them. I would much rather prefer if they were open, um, allowing me to store something like bottles inside of it, maybe wine bottles, for instance, for a wine crate. Um, that instead of just being completely shut on the top, only leaving space inside of the crate. I kind of like that. The second thing that catches my eye is I like how this edge, this right horizontal edge, looks a little bit more than the left one over here. Specifically, the right one looks like it's made up of three separate pieces, which might be a little bit easier in Blender to work with, versus the left one, which is one giant piece where maybe just the top of it was extruded a little bit. But either way, the right one is a little bit more towards my preference, and it's the one I might choose to do when I'm creating my model. Okay, so other than that, I'm pretty happy with all the other general design choices made here. And of course, we may give our own sort of influence as we move along, whatever just feels right to us in the moment, just to personalize it a little bit. Great. So, whenever we're tackling a reference model, the first thing you want to really do is take some time and try to map out some general nice shapes that are easy to start with to give you an overall feel for the shape. Once that's figured out, we can then go back and make more intricate details on those shapes to get closer and closer to our desired result. So to start, when I look at this image, it looks like all 8 corners started from a cube shape. Then they probably had their edges beveled, and then they had holes inserted in the middle. But regardless, they all started from a cube shape. And that's the same shape that I would want to use for my crate. Similarly, the vertical edges look like they are a beveled rectangular prism. Same thing with the walls, just a little bit um, more wider. And even though I can't see the bottom of this crate, I imagine that the bottom face looks pretty much like the top. But I guess the easiest thing for me to do would just create a nice flat, no design pattern for the bottom face, which might make a little bit sense because if a crate is sitting on the ground, I'm not going to be seeing the bottom face that well, so doing any sort of crazy designs won't really make much sense. So for simplicity, I'll just keep it nice and shut on the bottom, just for stability and just for what makes sense to me. The only other things are these horizontal edges on the bottom. So we have two different design patterns going on here. And again, I think I like the simpler version a little bit better. Just a nice solid beam that is connecting these two adjacent edges. And of course, for the top one, I've already explained that why I like the right version a little bit better than the left side. So it's just two small rectangular prisms, and then the middle one extends out to the middle. And speaking of the middle, it looks like we have a hexagonal shape going on here. But of course, because we're only using four sides, we could even choose something like a diamond or a square, or maybe even bump it up to an octagon, where the four um, alternating sides connects to these middle pieces, and the other four just open outwards, just for design. Again, this is the brainstorming that is going on in my head, and it's very, very possible that the ones going on in your head is a little bit different. But for the sake of this course, I kind of need to explain my thought process to you, just so you know what to expect whenever I make any upcoming editing. Anyways, let's pop back in the Blender, and let me showcase all of this discussion I've done to you from scratch. So, once you're in Blender, create a new file as I have located here. And the first thing we want to do is save our file. So I'm going to save it. So locate somewhere in the files in your computer to save it. And I'm just going to call my file create tutorial.blend, tells me it's a Blender file. So let's save the Blender file here. Okay, and let's work through things one by one. Now, I haven't really had any discussion with you about dimensions for my crate. So even though Blender's units are in meters, so I could show you this in the transforms panel, all these dimensions and locations are in meters, we could still choose nice numbers to work with just for the sake of building our object. And then in the end, we can scale the entire thing down or scale it up depending on the size that we want and the usage, whether it's for an online game asset or maybe just directly into a game engine. Okay, so I'm going to start with the corners of the crate, and you're going to get my full unedited thought process behind what I'm doing. So, as you might know, I already have a habit of just selecting everything with A, deleting it, and adding something, my first piece. So I'm going to add back a cube because I've discussed why I want my corners to be a cube shape. Okay, the only thing that I'm missing here is my reference. Now, usually when I'm working alone, I like to have my reference image on another tab or another screen to look at, but you can also bring a reference image inside of Blender. And I guess for the sake of the course, I should put it inside of Blender so you don't need to watch me keep flipping back and forward. So to do that, I will save the image, the reference image that I want to be using, and you should have access to the reference image as well. So save it somewhere, and in Blender, we're going to go in the 3D viewport object mode. We're going to hit add, image, then reference. We're going to locate and find our reference image. I've called mine create ref PNG, and we're going to load it. And we can see that it pops into Blender and it's oriented the same way as our screen is oriented. So these rotations might look a little bit funny. So to make it a little bit easier to access when working our crate, I'll start by zeroing out all the rotations. Okay, and once that is zeroed out, I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees to bring it up, right? Then I'm going to use the move tool, and I just want to drag it along these axes and move it somewhere up and far out of my working area, which is right here in the center. Now, the reason I've moved it along these axes is because I've now configured it to be along the XZ plane. So therefore, if I click negative Y axis, it takes me directly in front of the reference image, and then I could zoom in, look at it, zoom back out, continue working. Okay? So, with that out of the way, let's start working on this cube. Actually, before I start doing that, it's always a good habit to just rename everything. Just start cleaning up your outliner just from the get-go. So, my reference image, I'm going to rename it crate ref, rename my cube corner, and I'll also rename my collection crate. So therefore, every mesh that I'm adding into my scene that's related to the crate, it's all going to be placed inside here. Okay, so starting with the corner, I don't want my corners to be very giant with respect to the crate. So my default dimensions are 2 on every single side. I think I'm going to start by just shrinking that down a little bit to 1. And I'm choosing 1 because 1 is a nice whole number, and it's also a very nice number for me to do any sort of calculations with. Okay. Now, I don't want my corners to be very close to each other. So if I go back to this reference image, I could see that the vertical distance between adjacent corners, maybe I'll make this red to make it easier to see. Yeah, so the vertical distance between adjacent corners, it looks like it's a little bit smaller or shorter than the horizontal length of adjacent corners. And because this top face looks like a square face, I imagine that this horizontal distance to be the same as this one. So I'm just going to put tick marks here to indicate that I think these lengths should be the same, and double tick marks to indicate that this is a different length than this one, but it's also a little bit shorter. As for the dimensions, I'm sort of just guessing right now based on my relative dimensions of my corner. So I've already made my corner with dimensions on 1 on each side. So with that in mind, I think I'm going to guess and say the vertical distance between corners, let's make that 3 meters on each side. And the horizontal one, I want it to be a little bit more. So let's make it 4 meters. And this one's the same size, so let's make this one 4 meters. Okay, so we're just guessing right now. We're going to place everything in our scene, and if it looks right, we can keep it. If it doesn't look right, we could always change it. Okay, and this is all with respect to location right now. Okay, oops. So let's zoom out to make it easier to erase. So let's keep those numbers 4 and 3 into mind. So 4 for the horizontal distance, 3 for the vertical. Okay, so if I look across this face, so right now I have this corner centered in the middle of my screen, or the middle of the world origin, really. So I want my crate to be, well, the center of this crate. So that little point right in the middle of the crate, I want that to be world origin. So therefore, if I look at one side of the crate, that means I'm going to have my corners maybe somewhere over here. So these are my corners, like this. And then of course I will have, your edges connecting them like that. Just getting a rough idea for what I want it to look like. So this corner, my goal is to place this corner into one of these little positions over here. So the origin of the corner is in the center, so that means the origin is going to be in the center for all of these corners as well. Okay? So let's say if I want to place this corner and get into this position over here. To do that, we would need to do a little bit of math on how to calculate this. So in the viewport that I'm looking at right now, I have access to this x-axis and the z-axis. So let's work out the x and z coordinates of this first corner. So to find the z coordinate, well, we notice that the z coordinate is just the distance of this cube, the half distance of this cube, and then half of the distance of this edge. And that's pretty easy to figure out because my cube, for my corner, it has dimensions of 1 on each side. So therefore, this is a half dimension of, well, just half of 1, 0.5. So that means this is 0.5 here. And then the half dimension of my rod, even though I didn't draw it to scale, I did mention that the entire length of my vertical rod was 3 meters, meaning that my half distance is 1.5 meters. So the z coordinate of this corner, well, is just 1.5 plus that 0.5, which will give me 2. So let's write it here on the side here. I want my z coordinate to be at the 2 meter mark. Now to find the x coordinate, it's the same process. So the x coordinate mark is just going to be this distance over here, which I know is 0.5 as well. And then it's this half distance of this rod, which is also easy to figure out because I'm guessing that this has a length of 4 meters. This means that a half distance will be 2. And hence my x coordinate is just 2 meters plus that 0.5 meters, giving me an x coordinate of 2.5 meters. Okay? And again, this is because my origin is right here at 0, 0, 0, and I'm trying to get it over here. Okay, so that is going to put this corner in this position based on this viewport. But I also want to take into account the y coordinate. Now, because the top of my face is just a square face, the calculations for my y coordinate is going to be exactly the same as x, right? I'm going to have a horizontal distance of 4 meters, and then my corners all have half distances of 0.5. So the same math that you could double check yourself if you need to, but it is going to work out to be 2.5 meters as well. Great. So keep these numbers in mind. X and Y of 2.5 meters, Z is 2. So what I will do here is let's erase everything and let's showcase what that looks like. So this corner, we're going to put Z is equal to 2. X is 2.5, that's going to bring it there. And then Y to push it back this way, 2.5. So now I have one corner here floating into world space. Now, of course, the other 4 corners on the top are going to look somewhere over here. and then we're going to have 4 corners on the bottom here. And these are all going to connect, and it's eventually going to make my crate. Okay, so let's undo all of that. So let's try to put some more corners into place. So to do that, I don't have to go through the process of re-adding the cube and changing it. What I can do is, because I already have the dimensions configured for this one, I can select it, right click, and I can duplicate the object, or Shift D using a shortcut. So this object selected, Shift D to duplicate. I'm going to Control to put it back into the same place as it originally was. And then if I want this corner to be over here, for instance, well, that's just negating its x coordinate. So if I negate the x coordinate, I get, boom, my corner right over here. Now to finish off the corners for, let's say, one side of a wall, I want the bottom ones. So it's the same process. Select, duplicate, right click to put it back, and we're going to negate the z coordinate. To get this one, same process for the other coordinate. Duplicate, negate the z, and boom, it's going to be placed right into place. And you could see that I've just negated one of the coordinates, and the other two stay the same. So it doesn't matter which corner you started with, you just need to know how to negate it to get on the other side of the axis that you are working with. And because I started off with everything in positive, I just need to configure some in the negative direction, which isn't too bad. Okay, that's 4 corners out of the way. I still have 4 more, but I'm going to shift gears a little bit and start putting some of the edges into place, just to give me a better feel for what the frame of one of the walls are going to look like. Okay, so to bring an edge into place, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add back a new mesh. We're going to rename this to be edge. And my goal here is to place this edge and create this one. Let's start by creating this one. So to do that, I'm going to, well, to make it easier to work with, let's just change all the dimensions into 1, just because all my corners are 1 already. And we need to first put this in the correct place. So I need to move it over here and then up in this way. So that means it's going to have the same y and z coordinate as these 2 corners. So the y coordinate is 2.5, z is 2. So let's update that. Z is 2, y is 2.5, and it places it right there. And of course, I don't have to change my x coordinate because I want this to be in the middle at x is equal to 0. Now, next thing I want to do is I need to extend this in this direction, which is my x-axis direction. So we've already decided that I want my edge, this horizontal edge to be 4 meters. So I could just configure my x dimension to be 4 meters, and you can see that I extended properly. Now the reason this extended properly is because my origin is in the center. Remember, Blender scales things equidistant, which is just equally distant on both sides of the origin, depending on what axis you are working with. So for the x dimension, because my origin is right here in the middle, what Blender did is that both of these sides are going to be equally distant, and it split that 4 meters equally into 2 meters and 2 meters, giving me the 4 meters that I wanted. Okay, so that's good so far. And I guess right now it looks like my edge is like merging into my corners. So it's hard for me to differentiate between what is a corner right now and what is an edge. So I could do that by changing the thickness of it, and I think I'll scale it down just so that edges are a little bit thinner than corners. So I kind of want to squeeze it this way, but I also want to squeeze it this way. Okay, so I'm squeezing it in the y and z direction. So from 1, let's try to change this, let's say to 0.8 thickness, giving me this result. And maybe it's a little bit too thick. Let's try 0.7. And I kind of like this one a little bit better. So there's a little bit more of a visible differentiation between what is a corner and what is an edge. Okay, I kind of like this. And yeah, so with that out of the way, we can start to place this one because it's already in the same orientation. So I'm going to use the same process, select, duplicate, right click to put it back into place, and I'm then going to negate the Z axis to put the one right below it. Okay, so we have half of the frame completed. And I guess before I move on to the vertical ones, I could already see that my outliner is starting to get a little bit cluttered. So let's clean that up a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create new collections to store all my corners in, my edges in, and even the walls in when I get there. So let's do that. I'll click the create collection to add a new collection inside of this one. So I'll click the first one, rename it walls. Then I want to go back to create and add a new collection. Remember, I don't want to add a new collection inside of walls because then that would put it inside of here, which is not what I want. So yes, click create, added this new collection. We're going to call this one edges, and then create a third one. We're going to call this one corners. There we go. So let's drag some of our meshes inside of it. So the easiest way to do that is I can select the first corner, shift select the last one. And what shift selecting does is that it will select all of the meshes adjacent to each other from the first one to the last one, which is helpful enough for me and convenient because all of my corner meshes are next to each other. So all of them just get selected easily. With everything selected, I can drag it right into the corners collection. And the same process with edges. So I'll select my two edges meshes and drop it into the edges collection. Great. And the crate ref could stay outside because it's a general object for the crate. Okay, let's add the vertical meshes. So to do that, we are going to add a cube to start with. And of course, the goal is to place it right here, which I can do by moving it this way along the x-axis and then this way along the y. So this vertical edge will have the same x and y coordinate as these meshes. So let's do that. So x and y will both be 2.5. Z stays 0 because I want it in the middle. And let's configure the dimensions. Dimensions is, well, I want it to stretch vertically in the Z direction. So Z will be 3, as discussed. And we'll make the thickness the same as this edge. So the X and Y change to 0.7 thickness. And this is the result I get. Now to differentiate this edge between the other one, we're going to rename this to be vertical edge. And I'm going to drag it back into my edges collection. We'll rename these ones horizontal edge. Horizontal edge. Same thing with this one. Okay, that'll differentiate it a little bit. And I guess one thing I noted that didn't happen here is before you add a new mesh, if you click a collection first and then add the mesh, it will add into that selected collection. So maybe I should have done that first instead of dragging it afterwards, but it's okay. It's an easy fix. Okay, so to get the vertical one on the other side, same process. I'll duplicate it, right click, and negate it in the X direction to get it over here. Okay, and now we have the frame of one of the walls to look like. Okay, and it's already looking pretty good so far. And I think that before going ahead and creating the last set of edges and corners, let's try to add in this last wall, just to get a feel for what one side of the crate is going to look like. So we have a little bit of a problem here because the wall shape, as you could see in this outline, is not a very nice shape. It's sort of this very fat looking plus sign, okay, which is not a nice shape. So what we could do to get out of that is we can start by creating this rectangular shape, which just joins all of these little edges, these vertices of the corners here. And we already know the dimensions of this rectangular prism because it's the same as the edges. So this one will be 4 meters by 3 meters. And then to fill in the remaining gap spaces, we can extrude along those faces outwards to fill in these remaining gaps. Okay, now the only thing we don't know yet is the distance between the distance of this extrusion, but again, we can find this using math. So the distance of this edge, well, we first need to note that the height of this cube is 1 meter, and the thickness of this edge is 0.7 meters. So therefore, if I take this 1 meter and I subtract it with this 0.7 distance, that's going to give me the sum of these two spaces here, right? Because this space over here is that same 0.7. Okay, so 1 minus 0.7, that's going to give you 0.3. So the sum of these two spaces are 0.3. But of course, I just want one of them for the extrusion. And because each of them are the same size, I can just divide it by 2. And 0.3 divided by 2, well, that's just 0.15 meters. So my extrusions are going to have a length of 0.15 meters. Okay, and it's the same process to find the rest, right? Because all of these corners are 1 meter and all of these edges are 0.7 meters thick. Okay, so let's do that. Let's erase everything and add in the wall. So I'm going to click my wall collection, add a new mesh, rename this to be wall, and first I want to put it in the right place. So I just want to bring it over here, which is the same y coordinate as all of these meshes, which is 2.5. So 2.5. Of course, x and z stay 0 because I want this in the middle. And then let's just configure it. So let's get the rectangular prism shape first. So that means the x dimension is going to be 4. Z dimension is going to be 3. So that gives us that initial shape. And I guess we'll make the thickness the same as the edges for now. So the y dimension will be 0.7, like this. And then we can go into edit mode to extrude those faces. So we've already talked about extruding those faces, so that should automatically remind you of the extrude tool. So with this mesh selected, let's go to edit mode, tab into edit mode, face select one of the faces, and press E on your key or use the extrude region tool here, and I'm just going to extrude it. So I'm just going to click somewhere randomly to confirm the extrusion, and then in this pop-up menu, I can manually set that extrusion to 0.15, like that. Now there is an easier way for me to do all of them at the same time because all of the extrusions are of the same length, so namely 0.15 meters, and it's going to use this tool, one of the subtools. So if I hold to open up the sub menu, what we want is extrude individuals. And extrude individuals, what the diagram even shows a little bit, is for all the faces that you select, it's going to extrude geometry perpendicular to the axes that are pointing inwards to each of these faces. That may be a little bit hard to explain, but I could show you. So with all these faces selected here, if I pull this lever, it's adding geometry out of the same direction as each of these faces. Okay, so I'm just going to stop clicking or stop dragging it to confirm it, and then manually set my offset to 0.15. Okay, let's add everything back to get a better view. Let's go into object mode, and for the most part it looked good, but then we get this really weird glitchy behavior. And glitchy behavior happens in Blender usually for two reasons. Well, there could be more, but mainly one, if the mesh is too thin, or two, more commonly, the meshes are overlapping. And if I switch to wireframe mode here, I could see that these two lines are my vertical edges outline. But this line over here comes from the extrusion made. So it might be a little bit hard to see in object mode. Maybe if I go into edit mode. Yeah, there you go. So this lighter gray piece is the wall. And you can see that the extrusion goes past the mesh of the vertical edge. So we actually do have a overlapping problem causing this glitchy behavior. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've done all the math correctly. Why on earth is this happening to us? Now, to show you why, it might be a little bit easier to look at the dimensions of how Blender reports our mesh. So if I click this corner, for instance, in the Transforms panel, I can see that this corner, as expected, has dimensions 1 on each side. But if I tab into edit mode for this corner, and then under my mesh edit modes overlay section, if I enable edge lengths, take a look at what happens. Blender is reporting that our corner is 2 meters on each other side. The reasoning behind this is that Blender is actually reporting distances to us based on an original scale of 1. So if you remember when we added this cube for the first time, the dimensions on each of the side were 2 meters. But by changing it to 1, so halving each of the dimensions, the scale here also halved to 0.5 meters. Not meters, 0.5 times the original default dimensions. And this right here is actually the culprit. The culprit came from the fact that we've applied an extrusion to this rectangular prism without ensuring that the scale on each of the axes were 1. Now this could be a little bit confusing because if I click the wall back and go into edit mode, this extrusion here is still being reported as 0.15. But this came from the fact that we made a destructive edit onto a mesh that didn't have a scale of 1. So the destructive edits report correctly, but the original mesh doesn't. And you even see here that Blender is telling us 2 meters on each of the side, when clearly we could look and say, yeah, this is a rectangle. That's impossible. Another way I could show you this is, let's say if I go back and remove the visibility of the edges and corners, take a look at the x dimension, for instance. So x is 4.6, and with an x scale of 2. So if I go into object mode, and let's say if I move one of these faces, pretty far outwards, let's put it over here. If I go back into object mode, the x dimension clearly changed, but the scale didn't. And that right here is what's causing all the funny business. So I purposely kind of led you into this because this is actually a common culprit I imagine many people deal with, which is forgetting to update the scale of your object before making any destructive edits. So that said, we're going to do everything again, but we're going to do it the right way. Okay? And it shouldn't take that long because we're already familiar with the process. So let's go back and add our edges and corners. Add the wall back. So we'll click the wall collection, add the wall mesh, rename it wall, change the location, so y is 2.5, configure the dimensions, so x was 4, thickness 0.7, height of 3. That gives us this result. Now before we go into edit mode to make destructive edits, with this mesh selected, I'm going to go to Object, Apply, and I'm going to click Scale. And by clicking Scale, what you've noticed is all of the scale for X, Y, and Z has become to 1. So this is our way of telling Blender that use this new configuration as your default scale. Okay? Now, with that out of the way, if we tab back into edit mode, well, first of all, we can see that the measurements are now correct, which is always good. Then we can select each of these faces, use the extrude individuals tool to extrude outwards, click somewhere to confirm, and then manually change your offset to 0.15 meters. And you could see that if I go back into object mode and I move around, the glitchy behavior is gone. And this is how we kind of fix their problem here. Okay, So just taking us back a little bit quickly, you might have also seen that in Object Apply, we also had the option for location and rotation. Now, specifically, unapplied rotations can also be a handy culprit. For instance, if you've accidentally rotated your mesh to start to it and then made some destructive edits to it, that could also cause a little bit of problems. So that's why there's an option for that as well. Even though there's an option for location to zero out the location into a new section, I typically never see a usage for it because the location only changes where, well, the object is found in our world space. It doesn't actually change the geometry or size of the object. Um, so that one doesn't really matter. And I guess Blender kind of knew that a little bit because they have an option just for specifically rotation and scale. Okay, so rotation and scale is the one that you mainly want to focus on whenever you're doing that. And it's not so important about the other meshes because we didn't make any destructive edits yet to them. Okay, but of course in the end later on we'll eventually apply everything to one to make everything a little bit more uniformly. Okay, so right now this is the result that we get. And right now it's a little bit hard for us to differentiate between exactly the shape of the wall because it's the same thickness as the edges. So maybe change the thickness of the wall, make it a little bit smaller to differentiate it a little bit more. And I think if I just play with some of the settings until I find something I like, yeah, right here. So a thickness of 0.5 meters for the wall really makes one side look pretty good. And I kind of like this. So there we go. This is how we created one side of the wall. And as a little exercise for you is I want you to try to figure out using the process that I've kind of done. I want you to try to figure out how to complete all four lateral sides of the crate. So lateral is just basically me telling you complete the walls, for instance. So maybe I've done this one so far. I want you to finish off this side, and this side. So everything but the top and bottom pretty much. Okay, now as a little hint for you to try to speed up the process, remember that you can actually perform some of these tools on multiple objects at once. So if you select multiple objects at once, you can move, rotate, scale, and even duplicate all of these meshes. And by doing so, a little pop-up menu will appear on the bottom, just like how it would look like for the Extrude Individuals tool, and then you can configure any of your transformations there. Okay, so pause the video, try it yourself, and when you're ready, you can unpause the video and resume, and I will discuss how I was able to do it. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I know that this wall, the shape of this wall is the same as all four of them. So to get the wall on this side over here, because it's going to look exactly the same, I will press A to select all. I will control unselect the crate ref just by selecting it again to remove the selection. So you can see I have all my meshes right now except the reference is selected. Shift D to duplicate, and you can even see that when you duplicate meshes in a collection, it actually preserves the collection that they're in, which is pretty cool. I right click to put it back into place, and I'm going to move it along this Y axis to get on the other side. So it started off here at Y is equal to 2.5. So moving it 2.5 meters in this direction, we'll place it back into the center. And then I want the additional 2.5 to place it here. So 2.5 plus 2.5 is actually 5 meters. And it's negative 5 meters because I'm moving in the negative Y direction. And that's going to put my second wall right there. Okay, as for the last two spaces, I already know that the horizontal edges and walls are the exact same shapes as these pieces. The only thing different is that it needs to be rotated 90 degrees. So let's do that. So I'm going to select these meshes with shift select, duplicate them, right click to put it back into place, and we're going to start by moving it back into the origin. So that's 2.5 meters right there. And before I could rotate it, so one thing to mention is you want to use these tools when you're rotating multiple objects at once. If you do it in the transforms panel here, you could see that the only one of the meshes gets the transforms. And the reasoning is for which one gets the transforms, it's the one that has the priority selection, which is the light blue selected one and not the dark blue one. Okay, so you want to use the tools to do the multiple. So to rotate this 90 degrees, you could use the rotate tool, but you could also press R on your keyboard. See that rotates everything. Press Z to lock it to the Z axis. And I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees. Doesn't really matter which way. So -90 or 270 the other way around, doesn't really matter. And then let's use the move tool and push it back into place. So it started off at 0, and I'm pushing it back to that 2.5 meters. So right there, and configure it. So 2.5 meters in the -x direction. And that's my result. Now to get the last one into place, it's very easy. Shift select to select these meshes, Shift D to duplicate, Control, and then move it in the positive X direction. So 2.5 we'll put in the middle, 5 we'll put it back here, right there. And voila, this gives me the exact result that I am looking for. Right? And notice that I didn't have to bother with applying any of the scale yet because all I did was just duplicate and move the objects. I didn't make any destructive edits yet. So applying the scale isn't important for me in this part. So yeah, there you go. So admittedly, this way might have been a little bit faster than how you might have did it. But the point of this exercise was not for me to brag. It was to show how the same result can be achieved under two different workflows. The important part is that you had a workflow laid out to you such that you were able to complete this on your own. And maybe you watching me do it my way, maybe you've learned a couple neat tricks to speed up your own workflow. Okay, it's been quite a long and informative video, and honestly, we've made some pretty good progress so far. And you can see that our crate is starting to hold together pretty well, and it's already starting to look like the crate. And what is this? Only the end of chapter 2, for instance. But we can see obviously some things to improve, such as our outliner is full of a bunch of correctly named meshes with random suffixes, but there is a lot of them. And that's something that we are going to talk about and improve in chapter 3. Okay, amazing work, everybody. Keep at it, and I hope to see you again in the next chapter. Take care.